Welcome to Contemplify, where we seek to kindle the examined life for contemplatives in the world. I'm your host, Paul Swanson. Today, I welcome back into conversation Tracy Cochran. Tracy Cochran is a writer, meditation teacher, and editorial director of Parabola, an acclaimed quarterly magazine that draws on the world's cultural and wisdom traditions to explore the questions that all humans share. Tracy's writing has appeared in the New York Times, Psychology Today, O Magazine, New York Magazine, just to name a few. Her latest publication is her book, Presence, The Art of Being at Home in Yourself. In our conversation, Tracy and I talk about owning the gifts and limitations of our presence, her daughter's precocious questions about Thich Nhat Hahn, the Buddha's grief, and so much more. As always, you can visit contemplify.com for the show notes on this episode and learn more about Tracy at tracycochran.org. Now join me in raising a glass to my guest today, Tracy Cochran. Tracy, thank you so much for being here, and I'm thrilled to be in conversation with you again. And just to give listeners a sense of where you are and how you're finding yourself in mind, body, and spirit today, what is the context and presence you find yourself in today?
I feel joy being in conversation with you again. And I wanted to mention to your listeners that I have been gifted with a special voice that some years ago I developed a condition in my throat. It doesn't hurt, but it gives me a raspy and sometimes breathy quality. And I bring it up because it's a way of me to invite everybody who's listening to be with whatever they're living with in this space, and to remember our aim in waking up, this contemplative awareness we seek, doesn't depend on perfect body, quote unquote perfect. It's not about self-perfection or perfect conditions. It's an awareness that works sometimes, especially through challenges. In my case, having this interesting challenge makes me more present when I speak, brings me back to the body. So I just wanted to share that to start.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I really appreciate. We always like to conclude our conversations by make sure we bring the embodiment. So I love that we're beginning this conversation on what this gift has taught you and how you're sharing that with all of us here and bringing into our own consideration about how we're waking up. It's a joy because you and I were first in conversation 7 years ago, and it's a conversation I remember well. And I was just telling my wife before we got on here and hit record, I was like, I can't believe it's been 3 years. And then I was doing the math. I was like, it's been 7 years. And there's a question I love to ask any guest who comes back. And it comes from something my wife asks friends of hers when she hasn't seen them in a while. And it's simply this: what has become clear for you since the last time we spoke?
Okay. I would say the role of compassion. Compassion, starting with self-compassion. And I remember our conversation with great relish too, because we're kindred spirits in a sense, and seeking a truth that underlies all contemplative traditions, Buddhism, Christianity, all authentic paths. But what's become more and more clear to me, and it connects with what I was just saying, about challenges is that the deepest truth is love, loving acceptance, a vision that accepts and embraces what is. So I value compassion more and more and more.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I can't wait to talk about your book. And there's that flowering of compassion that I feel like is a thread throughout the book. And to hear you speak about it so eloquently, I can see how it reverberates between your words in your book on presence, but how you also show up in that with your own presence here. I always love to ask about folks about their practice because it's something that can look so varied across traditions and lineages and individuals and persons. What practice do you consider your home practice, or maybe the one that is your kind of foundation to your own sense of being a contemplative person in the world?
Well, I practice and I teach mindfulness meditation. That's what it's called in English. And it has its roots in Buddhism, but it's actually a practice, I believe, that's organic to all human beings and makes itself felt in many different traditions. The practice, as I teach it, and as it was given by Buddha, and it shows up in my book, is this ultra simple practice of bringing attention home to the body, to the experience of this very moment of the breath, of whatever feelings are coming up, whatever thoughts are coming up, whatever reactions and contractions might be showing up, and discovering that when we bring attention, and again, compassionate attention, accepting attention, it's not like seeing fear and thinking, oh no, it shouldn't be here, banish it, and accepting attention. It's compassionate. When we do that, we open, we open to the world, seen and unseen. It's a practice of becoming available to benevolent forces, to compassion, to wisdom, to life.
That's so marvelous. I'm reminded of very early on in your book, and it was part of this was like, there's usually a hook for me when I'm reading a book. And when you brought up the lines from Zen Master Dogen about practice and how that's seeing ourselves making one mistake after another, and your invitation of compassionate attention to that. I would love to hear any further ruminations you might have about how practice is simply watching yourself making one mistake after the other.
Because it's the so-called mistakes that turn out to be portals. Like when I was just speaking a moment ago, and I'm learning how to be with my voice, for a moment I felt, oh no, words not going to come out. But that is the place where I can bring this compassionate attention right there, that vulnerable place. And something happens, I drop into myself, I soften and open. And again and again, you can notice it yourself. It's right in that place, whether you're meditating or in the thick of it, where you start to feel this fear, oh no, I'm going to screw up. something's going to go wrong, right there, notice that can bring accepting attention and something opens. Really start to understand that we're the attention that sees. We're not just these bodies, these projects, but also that greater being, that greater attention that can't help but be loving and present.
Thinking about something, thank you for sharing that I haven't thought about in years, where in my 20s, I'm now in my 40s, I would go to concerts alone because, if I couldn't, there's no friend who wanted to go to the concert. And I would just pay attention to different social anxiety of like, what do people think of me? Here I am standing here. But how it would also, if I was showing up with some sort of tenderness to it, it would turn into compassionate attention to myself
Yeah,
about how I thought I was being viewed. I'm sure no one was probably thinking about it at all, but to allow those to just watch them. And it would just turn the tenderness into like almost like a playful, like silly you, but not a judgmental version of that. Just like, it's okay.
yeah,
Just be here with why you're here. And I think practice is the different forms that can come in is so lovely in the way, in the different seasons of life that we can learn to attend to that. And I think the subtlety changes. Has that been true for you?
First of all, thank you for that because it reminds me of something I always like to share with people, with students of meditation and others. Practice is really like your best friend. This and practice boils down to an intention to be present with compassion, loving friendliness. And so you were at the concert with your best friend, in a sense, with this kind of witnessing attention. It's like, it's not so weird or it's beautifully weird. It's fine, to be there enjoying the music and or whatever, talking in a raspy way and beautiful.
I love it. I love the combination of beautifully weird. I think that should be celebrated as
Yeah.
much as possible. In your incredible book titled Presence, the Art of Being at Home in Yourself, there's 20 short and delicious chapters that center on presence, which you name as an art. I would love to hear why you feel presence is an art form that has to be cultivated or can be cultivated. I don't know.
Well, I think there's a powerful tendency in our culture to talk about attention and mindfulness as a science. And a great deal of science and good science has been done. The benefits of mindfulness, lower blood pressure, keep the brain healthy. But it's also an art in the sense it comes down to a little bit of willingness, not will, but willingness to show up to life. And just like art, to see what wants to be manifest through you. Do you willing to be present right now, not some other moment, right now, right here? What wants to touch me? What wants to be passing through me? Being willing to move out of this tight certainty about who we are and what we're capable of. And presence is so interesting because it can be as simple and familiar as being present in a moment, putting your hand on the cup or the breath. But it's also this vast, surrounding intelligence that seeks an opening to speak through us.
You're revealing my dirty little secret about why I love doing the podcast is because it harnesses presence for me in ways that I don't do as easily or readily as elsewhere, because I want to be as present to you in this conversation as possible. I've read the book, I've digested it, I've sat with it, I've thought about it a lot, I've journaled about it. And then I throw all that away. And then here we are having that conversation, wanting to be as present to whatever comes up as possible. And it feels like the disciplined art of presence. And I feel like without that cultivation, we don't take as many opportunities as we could to be present in a conversation that feels porous and like something's being created here. But it requires presence from two or more people in conversation together, or those even listening. I think it's probably why I do this and why it's kept going, is because it has been so nurturing in the development for me of my own artful sense of presence. But you gave me language for that, I think, in this book.
Yeah. It's clear listening to you that what you're doing is an art. And it's also an act of devotion, a willingness, in a sense, to put yourself on the altar of presence, to be open and see. And it requires to really listen. You have to see all the stuff that gets in the way of listening. I'm speaking for myself now. A nervous little tendency to think, oh, I want to think of something smart to say, and to let that go and to really just be willing to be here and trust that relationship that can appear.
Yeah, I think that's a very luscious way to think about, like, trusting what's right here. And one thing I was really smitten by in your work is you're such a great storyteller as you look back of your life and you bring these stories to light that you experienced and lived through, but also there's these lessons, these little wise nuggets that come from that. How do you recommend others who are either listening to this or who will listen to this and then go read your book look at storytelling as a vehicle towards one's own cultivation of the art of presence?
Right. Well, my deepest wish and intention in the book and in life is to help people, including myself, understand real life. Our real life is our spiritual practice. We don't have to adopt another life. We don't have to adopt another vocabulary. We have great respect for the lessons and great ideas from Buddhism, from Christianity and its contemplative tradition, from Judaism, Sufism, whatever it is that helps you find your path. That there's an invitation to look at what's happened to us. And I have some pretty wild adventures in the book. And it can include something more like losing your voice or losing your wallet, things that happen. And to see also be spacious. The lesson doesn't always come immediately, but to see this is my practice, this life.
Hmm.
And this life is porous and porous. There are deep lessons, not just to be thought, but to be felt about what has happened to me in this life. Lessons about the power of kindness, the saving power of attention, all kinds of things. It's right here, right here.
Hmm. That's so wise. And you offer such a range of experiences in your book, from lost wallets to traumatic experiences. It's interesting to me, like the way that you, in some of those chapters, you drop into the depth of an experience. Other times, it seems like presence erupts in unexpected moments. And I'm thinking, particularly right now, just the story of you being mugged, and how do you hold the paradox of traumatic experience and heightened presence without negating one extreme in favor of the other?
Well, often you don't have a choice. In that, what I mean in this particular experience, the night I died, would you like me to tell it in
Please.
thumbnail? Okay. And
Yeah.
a lot of people have been interested in this story. When I was 28, and I'm a few years past that now, a long time ago, I was having dinner with a friend in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan in the days when Hell's Kitchen really pointed towards the neighborhood. It was dangerous. And I foolishly, being young, went to the market late at night to get spaghetti and, the major food group, spaghetti and beer. and, and when I was walking back to this loft past an empty parking lot, deserted buildings, I was jumped and put in stranglehold by 3 guys. So there was no escape. In the midst of this predicament, I experienced a light welling up inside me from my feet up to top of my head. I had begun meditating. Nothing prepared me for something like this. And the light welled up, and then shot out of the top of my head. And I had an experience of being out of my body and inside at the same time. Could see myself and my attackers and sinking down to the street in a stranglehold, and became aware, vividly aware, that the world that we see is just appearance. And behind appearance, there's light, there's presence. And I became aware of being looked at by this presence, and it was looking at me with great care. And also, like everything I thought I was, Tracy Cochran, my job, batting out the wet like clouds, like none of this is real. It came to rest in my heart, the region of my heart. And it was like, that's good, still alive. And the message was not just physically alive, but some aspect of heart, feeling, presence. And it was like being weighed, being in the palm of some giant hand, like it was some higher intelligence that could see my life, past, present, future. And, I don't know how long I was there, but I had the sensation of being held in love. This universe was held up somehow as confusing and chaotic and violent as life can be. That there's this force of love behind everything. Really cares about us personally. And as foolish as we no doubt can be, I certainly was. And it gave me a message: don't worry, just relax. And it turns out that's what you're supposed to do if you're in a stranglehold. Just relax, and you won't be harmed, was the message. And somehow I got my hand in my front pocket, threw a $10 bill on the street, and off they ran. But one other thing that was interesting, when I looked at my attacker, the person in the stranglehold, when I was in that state, I felt compassion for him. It was like a category feeling that wasn't just mine, that he could be so lost. And anyway, so they ran off, and I went back to my ordinary state, and I went to my friend's apartment and cried and cried and cried, of course. But inside the tears was that memory, so vivid. It's just like it happened yesterday. Behind the appearance of the world, there's light. So what I meant about no choice is, I say this with great care, I wasn't traumatized in the technical sense. I was protected, because in trauma, people have terrible experiences that they can't assimilate. And in this particular case, it was like a near-death experience. So in a situation that was incredibly perilous, I was being held in this love and light. So I'm careful to say that many people, including listeners to this podcast, have experienced trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I in no way would like that experience to be repeated. And yet, it was a portal for this extraordinary other experience that happened. It was an extraordinary gift. And it was like showing me something, a glimpse of what's possible. And after it happened, several people who were familiar with Tibetan Buddhist practice called Pawa, death practice, contacted me and said, that's Pawa, where people practice leaving through the top of their heads and joining this greater light. It was a gift.
Thank you for telling that story. It's a powerful story. And I think for me, one of the things I appreciate about it is there's complex layers within it, where you would never wish for someone ever to get mugged. And then yet that you have this experience within that experience. And I think one of the things that I took away from it and resonated with it was just the unending discovery of what might be lying in wait, even the most terrible things. And that's not to ever wish those upon anyone, but to recognize that this life is so mysterious, and to try to put a period on things that are just opening up to a whole nother medium is, I just even struggle to articulate it because it's just so woven together. So I really appreciate you sharing that story.
Thank you. I'm glad too. And it's true. You think of all the great teachers. Buddha said he teaches suffering and the end of suffering. And it means, yeah, there are going to be hard things that happen to all of us. Maybe not mocking a loss of a job, loss of a relationship, loss of a person you love or animal. And yes, it's really going to hurt. And in the midst of it, there's also a clue. Sometimes there's more. There's more to your life than what happens to you. And that's what this presence is. That's what this contemplative awareness is.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. And holding that subject of the story that you just shared, it makes me just want to swing to another side of the book too, where the chapter where I was just rolling in laughter when you share about the experience of bringing your daughter to a retreat with Thich Nhat Hahn.
Yeah.
And everything from her asking, does Thich Nhat Hanh have a penis, to on the meditative walk where she kind of breaks free and rolls, starts rolling down hills. I would love to hear just any thoughts you might have about the unguardedness of children and what that can remind those of us who are no longer in that stage of life regarding presence. What can we learn from that unguardedness from children?
They certainly tell the truth. And that remark about Thich Nhat Hanh, I remember asking a Buddhist psychiatrist I knew about that, and he said it's a very appropriate question, because she was like a little kid. We lived in Brooklyn, and suddenly she was like transported to this place with this huge retinue of Vietnamese monks and nuns. And she was like, is he real? Is he a real person? So that was the nuts and bolts of it for her. That was one test of real person. And unlike, say, a Barbie doll, I guess.
Right.
I never had genitalia, so or any kind of Disney creature. So she was just, that's what the title came from when he said, listen to the bell calling you to your true home. And she's his to me, my true home is in Brooklyn. And they tell the truth. And it was a real teaching in making space for her truth. And at the end of the story, she was throwing sand. We were at the beach. And I did something I'm very ashamed of. Well, not so. I have self compassion. I was kind of pretending she wasn't my child. So any parents listening can relate
Yes,
to that. Like,
I've been there.
and kind of looking down, and all of a sudden I heard her shouting. Then it got quiet, and I heard a bell ring. And I looked up, and Thich Nhat Hanh was sitting with Alex, and he had his hand on the back of her head and invited her to ring the bell. And I asked her what happened, and she said, oh, he just saw me throwing sand around. But unlike her mother, who was just looking away, like, who is this kid? He was like beckoning her, the loudest kid there, to come be with him. He was just making space and accepting. It was such a powerful lesson. It still hasn't made much of an impression on her decades later. Thich Nhat Hahn, she remembered the burritos we got after, but it made a powerful impression on me. The practice is about accepting what is with, again, that compassion, that calm acceptance.
Thank you for that. In our first conversation, I remember my daughter was 2 years old at the time, and I had said something about like, anytime we're just trying to get from like the door of our house to the car, it's like a three stride walk, but it turns into this long ordeal. And you had some great line about like, what a gift of like her inviting you to attend to what's happening all around. And because she's so curious, especially 2-year-olds at that. And I probably think about that once a week about like when I'm in hustle mode, like we got to get here when one of my children is lagging or more interested in something else, to just pause and allow it to be a reflection of my own hurried state of mind of like, why do we need to get from point A to B so quickly?
Yeah.
What is this moment unfolding? And so when I read that story, I was so moved by the way that Thich Nhat Hahn invited your daughter in and made space for her to invite the bell to ring, and for you to see that and just to know that unending message that you received from that deep impression. There was something about that felt like a spiral connected from from your experience with your daughter Thich Nhat Hanh, from what you shared with me, and how I'm carrying that within myself within these past 7 years with my own kids.
Yeah.
And I think that's how it gets passed on, is these stories that model ways of attuning to presence and not looking away or not trying to hurry through life's foibles. There's no prize at the end of you did it, you got there first. But being present along the way.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Thich Nhat, I go rushing, have something interesting to say. He would always say, this is a path to nowhere. And I would add, nowhere but here. And the other piece that's deepened since our last conversation is you brought it up, that power of listening and paying attention. Because the other person on the retreat, it really did capture Alex's attention. That's her name, Alex. There was a guy who was part of the teaching team who trained the animals. He was an animal psychologist for Xena Warrior Princess, a show she loved. And she was Xena for Halloween. And this person, Mark, really captured her attention because she loved animals and she loved nature. And we made little dowsing rods and stuff, or pendulums. And it was a real lesson for me in letting my child have her way of connecting with presence and truth.
That's so great. One of my teachers always talks about everyone has to row their own boat. And
Yeah.
It's great to recognize when, the oar I'm trying to give my children, well, maybe they got it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
You quote one of my favorite mystics in Meister Eckhart, where that great line about accepting all things equally from God, that what seems trivial in our eyes might be great in God's eyes. Can you tell me about Eckhart's message here as an invitation to accept all things equally? And how does that speak to you in particular? What is it about that line that you have found some solace or life in?
Think about it so often, and it resonates with everything we've been talking about. In a sense, it's like that hurry, hustle mind. We also have a sense of what is great, a great achievement, an important project, and what is small. And I think I used the quote from when I was in India and I was in a village, and these village women beckoned me over, gestured, come, have bread, have tea. And I was so moved. And it was a reminder, it's related to listening, of that often, I'm sure it's true when you come to die or when someone you love dies, moments we remember often really small in the eyes of the world. Those moments when they sat, listened to us when we were hurting, or they gave us something to eat or a glass of water, and their attention. And, and suddenly that seems so great and important. And all that other busyness is just a lot of noise.
That's so well said. I was just reading a book of essays by Brian Doyle, and there's an essay about and this goes back to the beautiful weirdness about kind of eulogizing somebody. And the wife was saying one thing she's going to miss about her husband when he goes was the way in which the thing that irritated her was every day he would shave and he'd leave some shavings in the sink. And every day she'd tell him and he would promise to do better. And the thought of going to the sink in the morning and not have those shavings be there was mortifying to her. That loss of that small thing, of that represented the irritable and the loving and just the humane connection. And as you were just sharing that came to mind. And now that I'm thinking about, those that we love and those that pass on, as we all do, you bring up the beautiful thing of when we practice that all of our ancestors are with us. And I can't remember if that was something that you learned from a writing from Dogen or if that had come from somewhere else in a Buddhist writing. But what does that bring for you, this thought of when you're in practice that ancestors are practicing with you? Why is that important for you?
It was Dogen when he said when we sit down to meditate, you sit down with the ancient ones like Buddhas, and not just this Buddha, but past Buddhas and all people who have sought to wake up. And that includes ancestors. And I think it's important to remember a lot of people I know take great comfort from being with the ancestors, African American people. And even for those of us, like I have some Viking ancestry, as for example, and you too, and early settlers, even for those of us where maybe our ancestors could use a little practice, that it's an opportunity to sit and extend compassion in all directions. So that if we have Viking ancestors, to encourage them to see they don't have to take what might be freely offered. And to listeners can't hear I'm saying it with a smile because it's not, I'm not saying it's something that's, I'm saying that for a moment when we sit, we can open our hearts in all directions, past, present, and future. So if there were people who were hungry, you can tell them you have enough. If there are people who were very wild and aggressive, usually driven by scarcity, let them know they can put down the sword. and just breathe and be open and be here. And I was smiling before because I don't want to pretend that undoing painful history is something that can happen by magic in a moment. But I do know that the force of love is powerful, powerful, and that people can change, starting with us. And we can learn to be in relationship with the land and animals and people with an attitude of, again, compassion and seeking forgiveness and forgiving and willingness to be a different way this time.
Lovely. Lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And there's another theme that's coming to me as we're talking about this, which I hadn't thought of before either, when you were relaying or imagining that perhaps the grief work that the Buddha was doing underneath the Bodhi tree, the grieving that had to be done and for his own journey to unfold. And I had never considered that, being that he was married and had children, and to be sitting under that tree and you talk about the grief that potentially went on in that time of sitting. What do you see as the connection between grief and impermanence and awakening?
It's letting yourself know the reality of loss. And before I was talking about imagining Vikings and so on, within our own lives, they say you can't change the past. And in a sense, that's true. And in another sense, as we practice, we can it's like thawing out in a sense. We can let ourselves feel the grief, what is lost, sorrow, whatever has happened to us, and extend compassion backwards within our own lives. It's that friend again.
Mm.
It's like going someplace dark and scary, but with an incredible, calm, and compassionate friend. So that something that's hurt you, I was I was making space for the truth that Buddha had to leave a lot behind to go forth, as they call it, into the unknown. And that had to bring grief and sorrow. But he wasn't alone in the sense life was with him, attention was with him. In the great mythology of Buddhism, the whole forest was accompanying him, the trees, the plants, his underground serpents, everybody was taking care of him and being with him. But we can bring that force of kindness to our own wounds.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It was something that really forced me to look at the humanity of it all. And you also make this connection to the land about touching the earth after awakening, and that invitation to sit under a tree, and like the importance of a tree, like the natural elements of it all, as that seems to be something that I find in our deeply digitalized world, that connection to the earth and touching the earth and sitting underneath the tree, it expands the relationality of human and non-human world. I would love to hear your thoughts on and how you might offer a suggestion for one to deepen their own sense of relationality to the non-human world as a part of practice. Is that something that you've spent some time considering?
Yes, yes. And it's interesting because I teach in New York City. I live north of the city and there is abundant nature. I also sometimes teach people who seemingly don't have access to what we think of when we think of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Even there, even in a big city, you have access to sky, to water. And one time, drummer Santero reminded me you have access to, when you observe people, it's like observing animals. They're all different types and archetypes. And you can open to your life by the life of nature by opening to your body, by coming home to the body and the breath and the sensation of feet on the earth, and that can be the floor. Ultimately, it's on the earth, even if it's 30 stories down. And but to realize that we are in inextricable connection with these elements of earth, air, fire. Our nervous systems are fire sparking, liquid, blood, water. That we cannot live apart from nature. And we can turn towards it at any moment by coming home to the body.
What a great invitation. It just, it grounds me in just the radicality of a recognition of our own animal nature and the giftedness of that, from our claws that we call fingernails or our fur that we call arm hair, and just this ability to kind of see, not to clean it up in a way, almost just to allow it to be part of our kinship with all that walks and eats and defecates and procreates, all the things. Like, what a wonderful thing to remember in our own presence, that gets us back to basics. And while we can celebrate the magnificent ways that we also connect and relate in the world, but in that shared connection of our basic needs, gratitude just always pours forth from every time I think about taking a drink of water, as I take a drink of water. Like, oh, what a gift that this liquid sustains me, and I'm made up of mostly the same thing. I start to like unravel in my own sense of gratitude for the mystery that I am, that I do not understand, but I'm grateful to be here, a part of it.
Yeah, me too. That's beautiful. And something else is also a source of freedom. And often in our culture, particularly in America, we think of freedom as individuality. But freedom comes with a sense of our connection to life. And we can experience it in practice when you move out of the isolation of thinking, always isolated, come back to the body, and you remember, oh, I'm in the world. I'm alive. I'm breathing. I'm drinking water. All those sensations and impressions. And what comes with those impressions is a certain openness. That openness to the moment. That's where freedom is. It's not up here.
Freedom of the moment. I think, yeah. Thank you for that. That's going to and stay with me for a while. And as we're talking, I'm thinking about those listening who, seek to live a contemplative way of being in their everyday life. And there's a particular chapter that I found striking, thinking about the everydayness of work. And there's these, one of the quotes that stuck with me from that chapter was, "A real teacher teaches with their back." And then I actually think it's on the same page with the sculptor Simon Verity talking about working away, sculpting for 2 hours at a time, taking a 20-minute break, going back to it, doing it 8 to 10 hours a day for 30 years. And then I could almost just imagine him, shrugging and saying, "This is a very strange thing to be doing," but the amount of presence it requires to do what his own art of presence, and then how that gets manifested in his sculptures, I found it to be quite remarkable, of like looking to teach by by the teacher's back, by what they're doing in the world and how they're showing you a way. And then this other aspect of presence through attention to every moment. Um, how do you connect those two in the relationship of the everyday work we do and whatever our job or vocation is, and seeing it as a craft, a moment by moment, disciplined attention, so that those who are watching us, we don't have to think about them over our shoulder, but we know what we're offering is enough.
I I think it comes back to presence again. And many of us, most of the people listening, maybe we work on computers or we do things. We're not stonemasons. Or the quote about teaching with his back was someone who was in a Zen monastery and he was observing a teacher with great posture. And so here we are, humped over, working on our computers. But the truth is, we can still take moments where we come back to the whole of ourselves, starting with body, starting with sensation, breath, feeling. And, when we first logged on, I told you I wanted so much to write a book that was real, that
Mhm.
had real stories in it. So even though it involved this process of sitting at a computer, probably not with good posture, they were still working on it, but still, there'd be moments where I could take a walk outside in the woods by the lake and check in with myself. Is real? Is this true? Have I lived this truth? So it's an intention or a dedication to open ourselves to something greater than isolated thinking or ego ambition. Can I offer something real? Can I let something pass through me that's larger, fresher, more alive? So for me, it relates to that.
That's so beautiful. I think it's such a gift to consider that and just let those words wash over, as we all have our own unique context and personhood and body in the world, as we seek to cultivate this sense of presence in the ways that we can, given the givenness, the strange weirdness that makes us us, and our unique spot in the world. Yeah, I am very smitten by your book and have enjoyed every chapter and the different angles of approach to presence by these sometimes wild and wonderful and adventurous stories, and sometimes just the mundane things of everyday life. I'm so grateful for this book, and I'm curious, Tracy, what's next for you? Is there another project on the horizon? Are you still in the throes of sharing the message of this book, or is there something else that's drawing you forward after this project?
I am very eager to have people read this book and respond to it. And I'm also planning on teaching. I'm teaching some workshops based on the book, based on body, the heart, the mind, all truth, helping people find their own stories and combined with meditation. So I'm excited about doing that. And I'm thinking about another book. I have so many stories I want to share. There were too many for this book. So all of those things.
Hmm. Well, I'm so glad that you're going to be offering workshops to deepen the experience of the reading itself. And I am far from surprised that you had more stories, because when anyone reads this book, the richness and depth of these stories, you could tell that there's many more that just couldn't make the cut this go around. And I, for one, will be excited to see those in print in your next book.
Oh, great. I hope we can be together in person sometime, maybe doing a workshop.
That would be amazing. I would love that. And to get back to the personhood and the embodiment piece, I don't know if you remember this, but love to close our conversation by asking my guest, if you were going to pair our conversation with a drink, what would be your drink of choice and why?
Thing that just popped into my head is icy cold spring water from a spring in the woods, something very clean and fresh and alive, living water.
What an image. I love that. And next time I'm hiking in the woods, I will, dip my cup in and raise a glass to you. I'm so grateful for your work in the world and for this book. I think it illuminates presence in just our own unique way of cultivating the art for presence that is already presencing itself in the world. And how can we join in this light? So thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much. It's the feeling and is very mutual about your work. I'm very grateful. So glad we connected.
Me too. Thank you for listening to this slow-cooked episode of Contemplify. May its delights spark wonder, and may any sour patches be sweetened by their folly. Head over to contemplify.com to find the show notes for this episode, sign up for the monthly Contemplify non-required reading list, and also the weekly contemplative practice, Lo-Fi and Hushed. If you are enjoying Contemplify, rate and review it on your podcast player. The internet tells me this helps spread the contemplative cheer. The theme song for Contemplify is called Langside by Charles Enns and Darren Hovius. Fellas, thanks as always. And of course, I am looking forward to bringing you more musings and more conversations with contemplatives kindling the examined life in the world. Until then, be well.